My name is Meg Graham. I'm co-chair of the panel. I'm going to be chairing this session, this agenda item rather, and then Michael will do the last one. This is agenda item 2, Wednesday, May 15th, 2024, 10:25, the Queensway. So welcome everyone and thank you for participating. So it's a pack. Okay. All right. This is a pre-application consultation, so contrary to what was shown in the notes, it's not a rezoning and draft plan of subdivision, but it's the first review of the of 1025, the Queensway. We have an hour and 25 minutes scheduled for the review. It's a formal review session, but in this case, because it's a pack, we're not going to have a vote at the end. Staff have 10 minutes for their presentation, and following that, we'll have a 15-minute presentation by the applicant with discussion to follow. Because it's a pack, we will not be live streaming on YouTube, and it isn't, I believe it's also not recorded, correct?
It's recorded. It'll be made available once the application is formally submitted.
Thank you. Okay. Next, we'll go to a roll call. Gordon. Oh, let me know if you have, sorry, and let me know if you confirm that you have no conflict of interest. Gordon.
I'm here, no conflict.
Michael.
Present, no conflict.
Ralph.
Present, no conflict.
Jim Goff.
I'm here, no conflict.
Jessica Hutchin.
Present, no conflict.
Joe Lobko.
Here, no conflict.
Jim Melvin.
Present, no conflict.
Ju Heo.
Here, no conflict.
Heather Rolston.
Here, no conflict.
Paul Kulig.
Here, no conflict.
And have I missed anybody? No? Fantastic. Okay, so some reminders before we get started. For panel members, do not forget the staff questions, please. And also to provide, don't forget to provide commentary on issues of both concern and appreciation. I will, how did Gordon say it, politely interrupt you when you have 1 minute left as a cue to wrap up your presentation. And so finally, then let's begin with the staff presentation. And please, if you could, don't forget to introduce yourselves.
Thanks very much, Meg. I'm just going to share my screen now. So if you can let me know when you can see it, that would be great.
We can see it.
Perfect. Enno?
Yep. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Enno.
Are you muted? I don't see Enno logged in actually. Am I making that up? No,
I don't see her either.
not here. Vanity, do you want to take over here?
Sure. Let me just see where she's at, and if Al Rozowski, who's the manager, can fill in for her. If you would just give me a moment.
Vanathy, given that we're on a short time frame here, why don't we have your manager or her manager
Sure.
make the presentation?
Okay. Let me share this, and I will ask. I'm going to ask Al to go through Enno's part of the presentation. So Al, are you here?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just do a very quick introduction, Meg and Design Review panel. So my name is Vanathi Ganesharaja. I'm a senior urban designer here in the Etobicoke York District, and the community planner on file is Enno. Al, I'm going to get you to quickly go through Enno's slides. So Al Rozowski, who's the manager of community planning here in the West District, he will get us started.
Thanks, Vanathi. Next slide, please. As indicated, this is a PAC file. It is actually not in as a formal application to amend the zoning bylaw. The site is located to the southwest of the Queensway and Islington Avenue. The site area is 58,983 square meters. It is all designated as mixed use. There is a large amount of GFA that's being proposed with this application at about 350,000 square meters. The net FSI is 6. The buildings range in height that includes several different mid-rise and tower components. We have a large amount of residential units at 4,222. There is a centralized parkland dedication that is being proposed. The development that is under construction to the north does have a park requirement that links into this development. The POPs, there are POPs components that are also being considered with this project. The project is primarily residential GFA. You can see the number is a large percent at 291,000 square meters. There is a retail and daycare component. The site and area specific policy does require a daycare on this site. Employment area at 21,963 square meters. There is above grade parking that's being proposed on this site, given its proximity to the Gardner Expressway, and this section of Islington Avenue is very busy. Looking at the urban structure, it is located on the Queensway Avenue, mixed use as I've indicated earlier, and the zoning does permit industrial uses, and that is the nature of the zoning bylaw amendment, is to bring it into the mixed use that's being requested. Next slide. As I referred to, there's a site and area specific policy that applies to the lands that was dealt with through a conversion request, and that is fully in place for permitting, so there's not an official plan amendment with this application. The SASP is 432 that applies to the site. Next slide. Just looking at the context, we have a lot of development application happening on the Queensway. Some of it is in a more mid-rise form, appropriate to the one-to-one relationship of the right-of-way. So in particular, the section between Islington and Royal York to the east of the site. The section that we have between Islington and Kipling is mid-rise right on the avenue, and we have contextually towers to the south that are developing closer to the Gardner Expressway. Next slide.
Thanks, Al. So I'm going to take it from here and I will go into the context. So thanks for familiarizing us with the site context. I'm now going to speak about the broader context and the really exciting big picture transformation that's coming to this area. The area north of the site along either side of the Queensway is subject to the Queensway Avenue Study and Urban Design Guidelines. The study spurred development interest in the area and helped shape growth for over the last 2 decades with a more urbanized street character and increased opportunities for housing and retail to support a growing population. This transformation of the Queensway into a vibrant mixed-use street includes a more pedestrian-focused environment with at-grade retail that promotes street animation and economic vitality. An expanding network of new parks and pedestrian connections also supports a healthier and more active community. The study and subsequent built, under construction, and planned development brings a greater sense of coherence and identity to the area, along with investment in improving the quality of the public realm to encourage a more vibrant public life. The plan and vision for the Queensway has been very consistently and successfully built out at the mid-rise scale with good street proportion that preserves a sunny environment on streets, sidewalks, and the public realm. As shown on this slide, development along the Queensway and land south of it is progressing at a rapid pace. The larger and deeper southern sites are able to accommodate larger areas of parkland and open space and taller buildings with the appropriate transition. 1025 the Queensway is one of the largest sites in the area and will play an important role to anchor the transformation here. Large sites like this one can provide significant benefits to the community because there is room for the ingredients of a complete community, such as affordable housing, retail and services, new streets, parks and open spaces, better pedestrian connections, and design that can support future low carbon and district energy solutions.
Ben,
The challenge of these large sites, yes?
we're over time. How much more time do you need?
Not too much. I'll go through it as quick as I can. The broader challenge for the Queensway is to create a collection of buildings that feels cohesive and has a unique identity that contributes to the energy that we're trying to see in the area. So I will point out this long-standing vision for greening streets and creating better connections in the area. The scale of development happening here means that new public streets are being planned and built to create a finer-grained connectivity within the blocks, and enhanced streetscape with more trees are also being achieved, transforming the community from gray to green. You can see from the images on screen that the greening strategy includes significant tree planting on new local streets like Haven Street and along the Queensway, where you can see that there's a mature tree canopy developing. With the transformation of the area, city staff are also initiating a complete street study for the Queensway with priority on the segment between Islington and Kipling Avenues where the site is located. The study work is in its early stages, but will inform future planning and decision-making around complete street priorities such as bike lanes, space to accommodate large tree growth, wider sidewalks, and street furniture, with the goal of creating a safer, more accessible, and attractive street for all users. Improving upon the quality of the parks and open space and connections to them is also a key priority for development here. Parks are defining features of communities, and new public parks such as the Marion Maloney Park and the new public park at 1001 the Queensway, which is directly in front of the site and facing the avenue, will add valuable green space and expand upon the public realm network. Development is an opportunity to secure new parks on large sites such as this one that can actually accommodate significant parkland provision and support better functional programming. As we turn the area from gray to green, parks provide an opportunity to increase the tree canopy and provide for space for recreation, gathering, and social interaction.
Ben,
I won't go through all of these slides in any detail, so I just want to reiterate that there's a lot of construction activity happening in this area, and the streets are becoming more pedestrian friendly with more trees and new buildings. This slide here, I just wanted to reiterate that there are a lot of edges and adjacencies surrounding this site. So there's room for providing walking, cycling trails, and improving the safety and appearance of the highway setback. There's also relationships to the built form, the lower scale built form on the west that should be considered. And finally, the site is becoming a part of a larger network of buildings, as you can see from the photos here, and other public realm and placemaking initiatives such as public art will be important. As seen on the screen, the site has an important piece of existing public art, Between Heaven and Earth by John McEwen, which will need to be incorporated into the new scheme. Finally, the site is highly visible from many vantage points and across great distances from streets, highways, and other tall buildings, parks, and open spaces, and the visibility and prominence add to the site's significance. So we have been working collaboratively with the applicant through the PAC process, and what we're interested in is hearing the panel's advice if we're supporting this transformation in the area in an effective way. So to this end, you can see the questions to the panelists here on the proposed network of parks, pop streets, driveways, pedestrian connections, vehicular access and servicing, the relationship to the built form in the public realm, the building massing, height, and articulation with respect to the scale and prominence of the site, and its relationship to the Queensway, its visibility from the highway and adjacent properties, its contribution to a distant skyline, and finally, the proposed approach to matters of sustainable design and resilient community building.
Thank you. Can we please move on to the consultant intro and presentation? And we're over, but I'm going to ask if you can to try to save, to do it in 15 minutes or less, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicola Casciato, principal at WZMH Architects. I will be doing the majority of the presentation, and I will be joined by Ray Ronigan from Studio TLA, who will be also presenting some of the landscape concepts. So I will start the presentation.
Thank you.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
So I've gone to full screen mode. People can see that? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. We're talking about 1025 the Queensway, as Vanathi has explained and Al has explained to us. I'll be going through a very brief introduction, some of our design principles. Studio TLA will talk about the site strategies, and then I'll just round up with the sustainability features. Early in the process, we met with the City of Toronto in 5 workshops related to the built form: transportation, parks and recreation, and community building. The outcome is what is being presented today. The proposal implements holistic urban design planning strategies that integrate environmental, social, and economic considerations to create a robust infrastructure and public spaces. We have implemented green infrastructure such as parks, green roofs, and urban forests to enhance biodiversity, mitigate the urban heat island effect, and manage stormwater runoff. The proposal prioritizes sustainable transportation options like walking, cycling, and public transportation to reduce traffic congestion, air pollution, and carbon emissions while promoting active lifestyle. Our architectural vision is based upon 3 themes found in nature: the heart, the valley, and light and air. At the heart of our design lies a vibrant core, crafted to encourage seamless visual flow and effortless forging of connections. The architectural articulation is characterized by step massing, which facilitates the integration of verdant terraces and recreational amenities, similar to a valley. The central parkland within the development harmonizes with its surroundings, infusing the area with fresh air, natural light, and verdant greenery. The heart. Like a beating heart, the park, nestled at the center of the development, is a vibrant open space crafted to encourage seamless visual flow and effortless connections. The building massing steps, creating cascading terraces with view corridors and increasing natural light to the parkland. The building massing descending towards the east and west while opening up towards the south optimizes the influx of natural daylight onto the envisioned central parkland space. The design of the public space, such as a central park, open green spaces, plazas, and squares, promotes social interconnections, community engagement, and cultural activities, contributing to the vitality and livability of the Queensway. The central parkland and adjacent open green space form an axial green corridor from the Queensway using the existing Ryokan Park as the gateway. Integrating diverse land uses within the built environment, such as residential, retail, employment, recreational, and a daycare, promotes vibrancy, diversity, and economic vitality in the public realm, creating opportunities for social interaction and economic exchange. The layout and design of streets prioritizes pedestrian movement, promotes cycling, minimizes vehicular traffic flow, and enhances access to amenities, thereby prioritizing connectivity and accessibility of the public realm. The new public roadway in a U shape makes an important connection between Dorchester and Islington, while a pre-existing driveway provides a vital connection to a signalized intersection at the Queensway. I'll invite Studio TLA to talk about site strategies. Right?
Thanks, Nicola. I'll try to be as quick as I can. So this slide shows the overall functionality of the development, how the public street network in blue arranged around the central public park. The large public park is the terminus of what is multiply connected open green spaces, and create a network of spaces that actually begin off this site to the north. The retail and the commercial and the residential frontages are highlighted, and there's also a reference to the private streets and the drive aisles that are in red. The daycare is shown in the pink box beside the park, as you can see it there, the northeast corner of the park. So if you go to the next screen, Nicola, please. So we are aiming to design complete streets. So we're aiming for streets that accommodate all users, pedestrians, cyclists, vehicles. Generally, the design that prioritizes safety, accessibility, and aesthetics. We are trying to create the presence of people walking, sitting, conversing. So this brings streetscapes to life. Where there's retail and active store frontages, outdoor cafes, public events, this creates like a vibrant atmosphere. The presence of trees along the streets will provide shade, visual interest, and a sense of scale. Some of the green infrastructure we're talking about, incorporating sustainable features like bioswales potentially, and we have to talk through the city with the city detailers like this about these infrastructure, permeable pavements that enhance the streetscapes that are all being considered for this project. Next slide, Nicola. So this is the one from the private street network condition. So you can see it will be ultimately highly pedestrianized, unit paved. It will have a different distinctive character. It will be traffic calming exercises, and it will serve as the servicing network for the buildings as well. So I don't think we need to stay on this too long, Nicola. We can go on. So the park design is conceptual, and it represents programming that speaks to a sense of place and sense of community, but you will get a better sense of the park actually on the last slide. It's ultimately designed with the city input. The park will be divided into typical functional zones like play areas, green spaces, pathways, seating, etc. We will have benches, trash cans, tables, and the design of these elements will align with the actual park's overall theme. There will be a welcoming plaza with dancing water jets. This is what we have in the concept design. And there would be privacy to create secluded spots and intimate corners for relaxation, etc. We will have pathways that will be designed to be accessible, that connects different areas of the park. We want this to be a resilient landscape as well. We want to design measures to prevent soil erosion. So we're going to get a little bit engineering just to kind of combat climate. There will be hopefully there will be an inclusive and accessible playground and equipment to suit all ages and groups. Grass mounds will provide spaces for picnics and play. We will use native species to support local ecosystems, again speaking to that resilient landscape. Public art and sculptures will be displayed at strategic locations, and again we could involve the community in creating these art installations as well. So just generally to summarize, the park will be integrated with the urban fabric and seamlessly connect to the sidewalks, streets, and nearby buildings. Okay, we can, again, that's just a pops. Nicola, we can go on to the next one, just to keep going through the retail frontages. So the retail, so I can see from the precedent images that, and I speak a little bit to the architectural aspirations, and we have designed the active retail frontages by imagining the clear, transparent glazing and inviting building entrances. This will allow passers-by to see merchandise displays and draw them into the stores. And we have designed areas for outdoor seating, sidewalk cafes, and merchandise displays. These elements not only enhance the street's appeal, but also encourage foot traffic and social interaction. The commercial frontages or flexible spaces. They'll be designed as flexible spaces that benefit from adaptability. We have allowed consideration for various uses such as pop-up shops, co-working spaces, art installations, and this flexibility kind of ensures that the frontage remains relevant over time. And as the design progresses, we will of course look for opportunities to incorporate additional trees, shrub planting, green walls, if the location is suitable. These not only improve the aesthetics, but also contribute to a healthier urban environment. So a little bit on the residential frontages, features like balconies and patios encourage interaction between residents and passers-by. And we look for as many opportunities as we can to provide seating areas to foster that sense of community. So there is no connection to the south or the east because of the vehicle network. So we have provided a heavily landscaped green buffer to those two sides. With the development, possibly with activating this element with a trail, and that's to be further discussed with the city. You can go on, Nicola. I think this is the last slide. So rooftop amenities. So there are ample opportunities in this development for providing like rooftop amenities, as the designs are not really fleshed out yet. Successful rooftop amenities go beyond physical features to contribute to a vibrant community where residents feel connected and engaged. So, again, speaking to a bit of the sustainability, because of the extensive roof capacity that's on this development, there's scope to create green roofs on every single building ultimately. Some of the well-known advantages of the green roofs, of course, are natural sponges absorbing rainwater, reducing water runoff, helps mitigate flooding, urban drainage systems, and the urban heat island effect, effectively combat heat island. And the biodiversity support, of course, always the biodiversity. Green roofs create habitats for birds, butterflies, bees, and all the other insects, and offerings for haven urban wildlife. They help restore the biodiversity, providing food and shelter and nesting sites, and contributing to the overall ecological balance of urban ecosystems. So, and that's an important feature when we talk about resilient communities as well, potential for food production, etc. I think that's the end of our slides, Nicola.
Thank you, Ray. And so in support of the urban public realm, the ground level has been designed to incorporate employment uses, retail spaces, a daycare, a town home lined street to make the pedestrian experience dynamic and lively. These diverse uses and activities attract people and create a sense of community interaction, contributing to the vitality of the area. The design of the ground plane limits the pedestrian's exposure to the gray service spaces required to make this a viable and functional development. Adding to the dynamic atmosphere are charming two-story townhomes that line the streets, activating the public realm and fostering a sense of community. These townhouses offer private patios elevated from the sidewalk, creating a semi-private realm recalling the porch-lined streets of the adjacent neighborhoods. The simple but textured architectural expression and residential materials of brick, wood, and metal panels contribute to the visual aesthetic of the built environment and positively influence the overall quality of the public realm, contributing to a sense of place. Located on the southwest quadrant of the site, the daycare facility opens onto the green area, enhancing the family-friendly environment. Located directly adjacent to the parkland gives the children a safe and seamless transition to the broader green space. The retail cafe located at the northeast quadrant is within line of sight. The retail cafe and adjacent open space and plaza located at the northeast quadrant of the site. This space forms part of the green corridor that connects the Queensway to the central parkland. The daycare is located in close proximity, providing a synergistic connection between the two uses. The scale and proportion of the step massing and buildings surrounding the central parkland creates a sense of protective enclosure. The human scale and pedestrian-friendly features of the parkland foster a sense of comfort, safety, and intimacy in the public realm, encouraging social interactions, gathering, and walking. Central to the parkland is an elevated wood-lined gathering space as its focal point, offering visitors alternative views to the surrounding neighborhood. The sloped lawn is ideal for picnics and informal gatherings. And finally, from a
one
Yep.
minute left.
And finally, from a sustainability standpoint, we have been integrating sustainable design principles such as green infrastructure, cycling infrastructure, rainwater harvesting, bird-friendly glazing, high-performance building envelopes and systems, enhancing the ecological resilience and long-term viability of the development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the city and to the proponent there for your presentations. We're now going to move into questions of clarification. We have 12 minutes for that. So if panel members could please raise their hands, and well, I'll take you in order. So I see first Joe, then Heather, then Ralph. Joe, could you lead off, please? Joe?
Now you can hear me. Sorry about that.
Yes.
Thank you. 3 questions. One, perhaps from a combination of staff and the proponent, tell us about transit on the Queensway, transit generally, higher order transit in terms of the density that's on the table. That's my first question. The second is, could the proponent team let us know, in the stats I did not see on page 18, I think it is, I didn't see a stat on the percentage or the amount of open space, public, parkland open space. I'm missing that. I think it's 4,200 units. It's a site of just under 60,000 square meters. What percentage of that is open space? And then my final question is, I'm guessing 8,000 to 10,000 people. Maybe you can confirm that as a prediction in terms of a population. I heard a comment about one childcare. What is that, like a 60 or 70 or 90 kid childcare? So my question is, to support 8,000 to 10,000 people, where are the community support services, and what is being anticipated in terms of supporting a community of this scale? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Joe. I'll respond to the first one, and then the applicant team, the 2 other questions. The Queensway at best has bus transit once every half an hour. It is not a high order, and there's no vision or plan to improve transit service at this particular time for the Queensway. It's something that we will be looking at with a review of development applications in the area. Islington is not a 10-minute or more frequent service. The Kipling does have express bus service, and it has 10-minute or less service.
Nicola?
I'll answer the 2 questions. So Joe, if you can just give me a minute on the stats for the open space, because I have to dig through other documents to do that, and I might have to answer that question at the end. But we have provided. We spoke to the city in depth about the parkland. The parkland that is required by the city is, if I can just go back here. I'm just going to grab a plan, and I might use one of TLA's. Actually, no, I'll use our site plan. This one here. So the parkland that's required by the city is this. If you can see my mouse, is this rectangle right here. I'll actually just put that. Is this rectangle here?
Yep.
So that's what's required by the city. This open space and this open space is additional to that. We tried, and I'm probably not the best person to speak to it, but over dedicating these 2 parcels of land to the city, but they actually just want this piece here, which is the parkland in the center there. So we are meeting the requirements that the city has put forth for parkland on this site. These 2 are spaces that we are oversupplying from a green space standpoint.
Maybe Nicola, I could just add one other point. It's Tony Volpentesta here from Buzzfields. Yes, indeed, we meet the statutory requirement that the areas that you've indicated that are potential over dedication, the city actually can't the Parks Department, can't speak for all departments, take an over dedication because there's fear that there would be kind of usurping other departments' jurisdiction in asking for other things as community benefit charge credits, etc. So the manner in which the parkland was put forward was A, it meets the statutory requirement. B, there's a potential for an over dedication, providing that the applicant is, of course, is credited for doing that. And C, the parkland was meant, as Nicola's presentation pointed out, meant to be part of that larger aperture that provides that link back to the Queensway. The second question, Joe, you had questions about the nature and amount of community services. And while the daycare is proposed and its programmatic elements have yet to be determined, we would expect during the fulsome review of the application that there could in fact be other community services provided. The nature of the SASP that governs how this overall development would be advanced through the development approvals process does require a block context plan, a phasing implementation strategy. We would expect that in due course with the review of the application that other commenting agencies that include community service and facility providers, including school boards and others, there could be and very well maybe additional community facilities provided. Your question about population, I guess with 4,222 units, depending on the PPU factor, I was using 1.8, it would result in a population of about 7,600.
Okay, thank you. Heather.
Okay, two questions. One, I'm just wondering how many levels of above grade parking are contained within the podium. This is actually the perfect plan to speak to that because I can see this is the ground floor. Just not sure if there's more above that. I'm assuming there is.
Correct. So there are 2 levels above this. So it's a 3-story parking deck. The first level is a little bit higher to accommodate for, all of our garbage vehicles go in here. So we're accommodating a higher floor to floor height. So there's a building section somewhere in our submittal, it shows a 3-story deck, but the expression of the podium is 4 stories because we were able to get an extra story in the townhomes due to the increased height of the ground floor. So what we have done is on all 3 levels, and that's why in all of our rendering images you don't see any parking decks, because we've lined all of that with residential or townhome uses.
On the park side.
On the park side, correct. Where we are exposed is on the Gardner Expressway here, so 3 stories, and then we have residential, above that, and then this little bit on Islington here, which,
Okay, thank you. You had
Sorry.
another question, Heather?
Yeah, the second question was just about the nature of those pathways adjacent to the on-ramp that are proposed. I'm not sure, question probably for Ray, just wondering if they're multi-use pathways, bike pathways, if you could describe what might happen in that area.
You're talking about the trail system in the green buffer to the south?
Yes.
Yeah, that was just another active amenity that we wanted to add, or get in discussion with the city regarding its viability in that particular area. I know it might not be ideal at close proximity to the Gardner, but I thought from a landscape point of view, it's quite a perfect place for a trail, at least, for some other kind of venture out into nature. I don't think I would see bikes in there. I would just kind of see more of a natural nature related walk trail.
Okay, thank you.
Ralph. Ralph?
Sorry, but yes, sorry. I think my question was answered with regards to interior community space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michael Leckman.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Maybe a more specific question about the open space. Let's say you use a nominal 2 square meters per unit, and you've got 4,200 units. You should have 8,400 square meters of open space. Are you exceeding that, or are you meeting that?
With the parkland, including the parkland?
Just in general.
Yes, we are. We're exceeding it, yes.
Okay, I'm assuming the parkland is a different calculation altogether. Second question is that when you see the aerial view of the developed site plan, it looks like there's a lot of green. When you get closer to the ground floor, it looks like it's very hard surface dominant. And then similarly, in your aerial view, the rendered aerial view, there's no green roofs on the southeast corner or on the podia above. So I'm just wondering, and I know, but I see the diagrams later on tell a different story. Which is the correct story?
Yeah, so every roof that you see from the podium up is required by the TGS standards to meet the green roof bylaw. When we get down below, these roof areas down here are outdoor terraces. So, and you're correct, and they're not developed at this point, at least in this rendering. So they should be, but they are outdoor amenity spaces here. The green space that we drew, I mean, I have to take a closer look at our plans, but we literally just rendered what the landscape plan that we have. So this should be an accurate representation of the landscape plan. We didn't reduce or take away trees. We may have in the rendering to see if to make sure everything's visible, or else there would be too much green. But if you can see here, yeah, this is what's been rendered on in our rendering. And so there's some, green spaces in the middle. There's a water space, and then there's green lined trees along the park edge here. So I think it's a fairly accurate representation of what we're showing, both in plan and in rendering.
I guess if I can just have a supplemental, if you look at the kind of diagrammatic views, let's say, for instance, on page 36 or 38, the keep going.
Yeah, I don't have the entire.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have the entire.
So that's fine.
I have to reduce it to keep the time.
Understood. I just wondered whether there was a condition that you were trying to address by having, it looks like it's much more than 50% hard surface, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And the opportunity here is to do something much more green than maybe is what's shown. I wondered whether there was an overall strategy that maybe I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, maybe that's a comment. Okay.
Megan, I forgot a really important question, actually. Completely
But Ralph,
forgot.
we've got a lot of
It's at the essence of my commentary, if I may ask it, please. The ground floor plan, you talked about, you have a plan, actually, that ground floor plan that shows all these colors, and you mentioned retail, townhouses, daycare. Can you just explain what these beige colors are and what the pink colors are, so that I understand exactly what?
Sure.
Is that great? Thank you.
So the legend on the bottom is the red color or salmon color. That's retail.
Yeah.
And the daycare is colored retail. So
where is that daycare?
It's here in this corner here. I'm waving my mouse. It's in building R9.
Okay.
The salmon color R9 there. That's the daycare. The cafe that we're rendering is an R1 right here. So that view is taken from there. We have some retail on Islington, a small amount. And then leading in from the Queensway along the driveway, we have R10 has a retail space as well.
And then the beige is all townhomes, correct?
This yellowish color, this light buff color are the townhomes that line the street.
Mm-hmm.
And then and Islington. And then the darker yellow are lobby spaces or amenities that happen on the ground floor. And then the gray area is the service area. Any service loading, that kind of thing is in the gray area. And then the blue indicates the employment uses along Dorchester in this 2 7-story office buildings that we have here.
Okay, super important for us to catch up here, and it's possible if all the questions and answers are succinct. So we're going to move on to Jim Goff, please.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have 4 questions, Madam Chair. First, given that you do state you want to design a complete community, I'm curious as to whether there was any thought about retaining a cinema.
Not as a final not in the final form, but throughout the phases, the cinema is kept. But we hadn't thought about that as a final built form.
Okay, because yeah, well, I have opinions on that, but we'll leave those for the end.
Yeah.
On page 18, you mentioned the parking ratio as 0.5 spaces per unit. I think you mean 0.5, if I'm correct, and I'm curious what that is based on.
It likely is. Well, I'll just ask my team. Is it 0.5 or 0.5? It's likely 0.5. I think it's based on what we discussed with our traffic engineer and what we discussed with the client from a marketability standpoint, in terms of what we can support here.
Okay.
And what's happening in other developments around. So,
Okay. Could you describe a bit about where the parking and loading accesses are going to be?
sure. So in the street network, the new streets we are providing is in a U shape and then a tail that goes out to Islington. The parking is accessed from one spot from here. Actually, I have another plan that shows it better. So you can see it down in the bottom corner here. All of our parking is accessed from Dorchester and this new street going out to Islington. And you can see the type Bs and type Cs. So they're all accessed as immediate as possible to the streets that they're coming off of, because although cars are going to drive on this, we want to mitigate the number of cars that come onto the site here, but there will be access there in those locations that you see in gray on the bottom left diagram.
Okay, and the final question is, I find it a bit odd to see a new public road, the new east-west road you're creating, connected to the Queensway via a private driveway. What's the rationale for that?
That you'll have to take up with the city. That private driveway was established before we came on board, and although we would like to see that as a street, that was a pre-existing condition, and for us to plug in a public road into that driveway didn't work for various reasons: snow plowing, bulbs, all this kind of stuff. So, but I'm not the person to answer that because I question it myself.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Jim Melvin.
Thank you, Meg. Just a little bit of a follow-up to what Jim was just talking about. Can you explain entrances and exits on the plan? For example, the new road that has access to Islington, that seems really close to the Gardner on-ramp. I'd be amazed if Ontario government let you put an access point that close to an on-ramp. And connections at Dorchester, you mentioned a light at Queensway and the driveway.
Yep.
At Dorchester, is there going to be a new light, or will you think about connections to maybe St. Lawrence Avenue, which is one more street to the west?
I'll let the city answer that question. When we like I said, we went to several workshops with the city talking about transportation, and this is the plan that we landed on. So I'll let the city answer that.
And who from the city will answer that?
Is that you?
Hi, we've been doing some master planning for the mega block between Islington and Kipling, south of the Queensway. We have other development up. We're just trying to figure out the spacing of the signals, but this is the direction that we provided the applicant in the PAC stage.
So at this, you're suggesting then that's a signalized intersection south of the Queensway on Islington, near the on-ramp.
Yeah, it's awkward.
Yeah, I think that Transportation Services provided that direction. There's a reconfiguration of the ramp that's also happening in this area.
Can you
So
talk
with
more
all-
about that, Al? Like, what's the reconfiguration going to be?
Yeah, there was, I don't know if Enno or Bonathy might have that image. The proposal does take it into account. There was an environmental assessment that was done and completed with the uploading of the Gartner to the province. We're not really sure what the province will do with that EA.
So let me just ask a quick to the proponent. If you do not get that intersection onto Islington, how does your plan change? How would like is that connection to Islington has to be made to make this a successful project?
I think we have planned for the existing condition in terms of that intersection.
Okay, I think it might be changing once you get MTO in, but thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. We're going to skip, I'm going to just quickly, I'm going to skip the chair's reiteration of key info, but other than to say this is a pre-application consultation session. The site's 14.5 acres and for over 4,000 units. Let's move right into panel discussion. And we're going to go in the following order, please. Gordon, Michael, Ralph, Jim Goff, Jessica, Joe, Jim Melvin, Juhi, Heather, and Paul. We have 38 minutes, but because we're a little bit behind, I'd ask you to do your best, please, to keep your comments succinct. So, Gordon, starting with you, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the proponent team for making this presentation today. I do have comments on it, and I have concerns. I guess when I look at a project, especially when it has a great deal of density to it, I try to see whether the I'll call them the safety valves relative to higher density are actually in place. So transportation, as has been indicated by the city, is limited in capacity relative to the size of the population. I'm assuming both residential and I think you have some office in there as well. It seems as if there's not a match there, so that makes me a little bit concerned and curious. Also, I understand that even though the public green space that has been provided is as required, I wonder whether it's sufficient. And my comments regarding that is that if it is as required, I think the next step is to make it actually work really, really well. And I'm going to pick up on some of the comments that other people have made, and that is it appears as if there's a lot of hard space. With this much population, I think as much effort that has been put into the landscape so far, it needs to be accelerated and added to exponentially to really get a sense of how this green space is going to cope with and provide a suitable setting for the community that you're proposing to build around this. And at the moment, I don't see that in the design. Example, if there's going to be residential down at the street level, I don't see enough of a setback to create a comfortable residential transition and a comfortable outdoor residential patio or front yard. I don't even want to call that just a front green space relative to the fairly well-used streets. I think that there's a lot that's going in here, and I think there needs to be some more space for some of these transitions to work well. I'm very curious about shadowing. I noticed that you didn't identify that or show it in your presentation, but I'd be very curious about that because based on all the towers, I'm assuming that there are times of the day and season when there is shade on this park space. And I'd be curious to know out of all the square meterage that there is available, how much of it is actually usable and enjoyable. And I think that's a question that perhaps should be answered as you move forward. The only other comments I have, and I'm not sure whether we're supposed to comment on built form right now, I'm assuming they're largely placeholder in terms of the aesthetic. And my comment is that it feels a bit like a monoculture, at least by the renderings. And I think moving forward, that would need to be also looked at. Again, a lot of building, a lot of density, A lot of hopes in the diagrams, but I see a gap between those two things. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pick up maybe where Gordon left off. I think, first of all, some of the things that I like about the scheme are the ways in which the interior edges have been considered as a strong scaling element to the large open space that's there. Lots of towers around the edge. Very important to have good scaling elements, certainly on the south and east sides of the large open space. You know, at this stage, I'm assuming that all of the architecture is nominal, is representative. When I look at the possibility of a harmony and diversity, I guess you could say, in the architecture, even though this is placeholder, in my opinion anyway, and I know it's not always shared by other panel members, you know, harmony and diversity has a role to play here, I think, in a good way. One of the things that I think needs more development is just that, and we see this fairly commonly, is that at this stage you're using placeholder. I'm going to say placeholder representations of the landscape for the park that you don't necessarily have any control over. So the result is that the heart of the scheme is something that you're not able to contribute to, and yet the entire scheme is heavily reliant on it in terms of representing the true character of this development. So, and then when I look at just the pure geometry of the scheme, thinking of other great cities in the world, and how the geometry of the open space is something that's heavily controlled. The park to the north, connecting to the existing park, and an offset to to the open space. Those things can all work very well. I think that they don't seem spatially distinct yet or spatially deliberate yet. And then similarly, when I look at the perimeter road on the south and the east, I get a sense of an intent to create an alley of trees. Of course, in this case, it's for cars, but I get a sense that there's an unmet opportunity to very clearly create a sense of space and place in simple gestures that, again, at the moment appear to be, I'll say, nominal. And I know that you're showing the rendering now of the park space. I stand by my earlier comment that there's a sense, if you take away the tree canopy, there's a lot of hard surface here. And I think that there's an opportunity to look more carefully at the balance of hard surface and soft surface in this generous park area. And then lastly, I would say it looks to me like when I use a scale, a simple scale, that you're getting the right separation distances between the towers. I would say, though, that if you look obliquely at all of these towers, there are going to be significant portions of the day when that central space from morning through early afternoon, where there's going to be a lot of shadow on this space. And I know it's all done in the effort to keep the Queensway shadow free, but I think that there's a balance that's still available here to be struck in the spacing of the towers, the orientation, shaping of the towers, something that focuses on character, light access to the space that you're making, and strong landscape character, strong landscape identity to support the architectural strategies. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ralph.
So I want to commend both the proponent with a really amazing package. It's incredibly well presented, easy to read. Given the scale of it, there's probably about 7 design review sessions just on this site, and how quick you went through the material. I also want to commend the city staff what I think is a mic drop presentation from the urban designer, which was incredibly essential for us to review this. So I think I'm pretty happy here. Clearly, I think this density is inevitable along this corridor. I think that the city is accepted it, and I think what we are seeing here is something that is incredibly generous. We're struggling with public realm and public park in sites like this, and we really appreciate the offering of the fulsome park dedication and then more. So I think that I think there's a shock of the new, the extent of it, the fact that we're looking down mainly on all the representations. So I think that what I'm more interested in is understanding what the personality of this place is. And so I think that I'm just going to go really quickly on just some comments, which I think are maybe essential for me to really support this wholeheartedly. One is I just don't think there's enough retail. I know it's a struggle off of Queensway. I just think Queensway is never going to be a high street. And I think that this has an opportunity to be great, a neighborhood retail. Imagine it if 7,000 people plus all the other people that are going to want to be in this space and having more retail. And I think there's opportunities. I was kind of disappointed where the daycare is because I thought that was a small food store offering, and of course, the outdoor space, which is a play area, for me stunts that private space, that private linear space adjacent to the park that becomes a dead end because it's encumbered. I would move it on the south side. Maybe some of it could be tucked in underneath a loggia or a canopy. Have R9 be given a bit of a slice at the bottom to have the play area south facing and with cover, and then allow that vertical north-south private space to actually really be something different, or else it's kind of this strange space adjacent to the park. I would say that the entire R9 should be lined in retail. I think the northeast corner of R9 should be another restaurant adjacent to another restaurant on the north side. I think there has to be critical mass, and I think that you can actually have commercial space going down that frontage. You should also look at live work units that are being proposed now at bases of units where the commercial is at grade and somebody lives above. They're great investments. They're great for young people that want to start a business and be entrepreneurial. I also think that C1 and C2 are kind of like falling off the page. I think R9 should move south, allowing a kind of Largo to connect from the major public park to C2, to allow C2 and C1 to feel connected, not just because of a street, but actually in a more pedestrian, fulsome way, allowing a restaurant also to have a robust patio that wraps around that corner. I also think that R9 should be given a diet. It should be like an object within the larger space. I think it could come down. One thing I want to talk about is this idea of a valley. So everything's big spaces here. The valley for me got me really excited. I'm going to hold you to that section because I do think that that personality can find itself all around the park, and these crenellated valleys should come down to the ground and not start at the third floor. I think it should be much more of a valley, eroded valley edge, allowing ins and outs and a texture that you kind of see the spirit of it, and I'm kind of excited about that. And I think that if you're asking for these tall, slender towers, that this kind of crenellated, almost eroded ground plane is really quite exciting and could really create that textural quality at a pedestrian scale. The Big L, I'm just going to say that, as much as I understand it, the parking up against the highway, we know that every time we work against the highway, you put an opening in and it becomes a real problem. So I get it. I just think that southeast corner is going to be a really strange wind condition because there are winds that are going to come from the northwest and they're going to get trapped in that corner. And I think that that's a challenge. And I think maybe an aperture there just to kind of create an environmental condition that's appropriate. I also think for those wonderful people strolling across the highway along Islington, they have to cross over at the entry of the on-ramp. I think that somewhere around there might be an opportunity to break through and break that L-shaped wall a little bit. So I'm I'm asking maybe to look at 2 apertures or 1 aperture that does both, allows a little bit of, I'm going to say, kind of breaking through that wall. Also think that that's an incredibly large L-shaped wall facing the Gardner. There's still people, part of the city. It should be enclosed at the very least. God help you if it's just, open and like, industrial lighting for parking is what you're expressing this new neighborhood to the city. But also, I think it's going to need a bit of work, and we have yet to see it, but looking forward to seeing it. And again, R1 as well. I think the retail should go all the way up to the towards the Queensway and wrap it. Anywhere there's a kind of a space that you can spill out into. And again, the landscape architect mentioned how great these complete experiences are. I think townhouses just privatize it and make people not want to be there and feel that it's not theirs. And so I think you need to kind of provide that for 7,000 people plus all the people that are coming in this super block between Islington and Kipling. Otherwise, I think that's it, and I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to seeing it evolve.
Thank you, Jim Goff. Jim?
Yeah, sorry, Madam Chair, I was muted. Thank you for the presentation. I think I have to say, first of all, as the transportation person on the panel, that I'm shocked that there seems to be a general acquiescence to the very low level of transit service on the surrounding streets. 30-minute frequency bus service is what you would see in northern low-density suburbs. And with the amount of development happening in this area, I would be deeply concerned about how people living and working in this development and others along the Queensway are going to move, given the existing traffic on the Gardner and the surrounding arterial network. So I strongly recommend that there needs to be a transit strategy completed as soon as humanly possible here. At some point soon, I would really see this the lack of this strategy as threatening the viability of high density development here. You've got absolutely no rapid transit facility within any kind of reasonable walking or cycling distance here. And I just think that's untenable. That's my opinion. A lot of what, shifting away from that, a lot of what seems to be green space, when you look at it in the rendering, seems to actually be hard surface. I think for this intensity of development, there should be an opportunity to provide more green, especially things like planting for biodiversity and pollinators and that sort of thing. The landscape strategy seems pretty bland overall. I realize it's probably just an initial concept, but I think there needs to be really forward thinking about if you're trying to make this a complete community in the 21st century, what does that look like? You're going to have a lot of families living in these apartments. So how about a garden for kids as part of the daycare? Show them how to grow food and flowers and whatever else. Create a connection to the land so that's not totally lost. And going back to what Ralph said, I totally support the idea that there's not enough retail here. I don't think there's enough to activate the space. It feels like a token, like, oh, we're adding a cafe. I don't think that's nearly enough. Complete communities are about keeping trips internal so you don't add unnecessarily to the loading of the streets around it with more single occupant vehicles. And I don't think you have a good balance for that. This also goes back to my comment about the end of the cinema. Some kind of multifaceted entertainment facilities here would also help to make this a more complete community and minimize those external auto trips. With the concept as it is now, I think this is going to function like a residential enclave or a vertical suburb, not really a complete community. I do think it's great you're proposing the bike facilities you've shown, but those cyclists are going to need a place to park, assuming you have destinations they want to stop at. So if this concept proceeds, I really do believe bike parking and bike share spaces need to be integrated into the design in a central location at grade, again, to minimize auto trips. We see over and over again that those kinds of things just aren't mentioned, that they're kind of tokenistic additions to the plan later on. Okay, we'll add a few spoke and ring bike parking spots later. I don't think for a development of this density and scale, that would work. You need to plan the bike facilities now at grade. I'm not talking about the residential bikes, I'm talking about visitor bike spaces. Finally, the connection to the Ryokan parkland needs to be as strong as possible in terms of minimizing the intersecting driveway and using materials that really emphasize that north-south pedestrian connection to bring people up to the Queensway on foot as opposed to driving in their cars. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Jessica.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you very much for your presentation. This is quite a large development, obviously in Etobicoke, and I will say I'm quite familiar with the theater in this area, having grown up in Etobicoke and seeing this parcel of land and the Queensway change over time. It's quite interesting. I echo many of the comments you've already heard today about the amount of hard versus soft, access to sunlight, and the amount of retail. Some initial reactions to the building massing and sort of variation in heights. I was, there was a bit of a sameness, obviously, the early graphics, but I think even in terms of the heights, knowing that this area will be seen from sort of a lot of places in the city, looking at that variation and trying to sort of change the variation a little bit might be something to look at. The base building, the L building as it's been referred to along that south and eastern edge, is really solid and really unbroken and sort of only breaks to allow vehicles to enter in, it seems like at 2 or maybe even 3 locations. And so it just feels like a natural break in that podium or townhouse wall would be sort of between maybe Tower 5 and 6. To even to link up with that pathway along the Gardner. The pathway as it stands really doesn't connect anything to anything. It sort of seems like you may come out of the sort of at-grade parking to enter the pathway. And so I'm sort of struggling with what that is. It's a challenge. It is with all these sites that face onto transit corridors like this. But I think it could probably operate and function a little better. Especially with a break. Likewise, even a break between Tower 4 and 5, allowing that porosity to Islington. I know it seems inhospitable, but people do walk over the bridge and cross south of the Gardner. And so allowing sort of the community to the west to be able to come through this community and get onto Islington to then head south. To New Toronto, I think is an important connection. The road network seems, it is a big part of the plan. It does seem a little car dominant with a heavy focus on those dedicated bike lanes. I would have liked to understand what else those bike lanes connect to and how they connect into the larger network. But again, we've got sort of fairly wide right of ways and looking at maybe more interesting ways of calming down traffic here, slowing vehicles, maybe fewer laybys. It just feels like a bit of a standard application that could maybe be more inventive, especially given the large frontages of townhomes. And then just a final comment on the space between the commercial buildings on Dorchester and the residential buildings to the east. The space in there, again, it feels a little inhospitable. I think one of the bird's eye renderings, it looked just like the lights were on. It was the middle of the day. So again, looking at how to develop that carefully so it doesn't feel like a back of house, and it really feels like a part of this community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. Joe.
Thank you. There are a number of things I like about the proposal. The basics of the street and block plan, the straightforwardness of the open space plan overall and its potential connection to the Queensway, the focus of a big green space as the kind of heart of the community as described. I think those are all very positive aspects of it. However, I have some serious reservations also about what we're seeing. To follow up on Jim's observations, I do not see this as a viable development absent higher order transit. This does not make any sense to me. We should not be making these kind of vertical suburban car dominated communities with this kind of density. We are just asking for trouble down the road with almost a complete absence of community support facilities, traffic nightmares. It's not making sense to me. I recently did a study of 2 stations along the Ontario line and how they're being developed by the province of Ontario, who's expropriated similarly scaled sites in the east end of town at Gerrard and Carlaw, one site north of Gerrard, the No Frill site, one site south of Gerrard. They both have, notwithstanding their proximity to high order transit that's coming and a much more urban location, much less density than is being proposed here at 6 times. So, right off the bat, I think this is just far too dense. Maybe 3,000 units and still needing some higher order transit. But 8,000 people here in a car dominated development just doesn't make any sense to me. And that becomes evident or further reinforced or exacerbated by what I would describe as a canyon and not a valley. The valley analogy was lovely, and I appreciate Ralph's embrace of it and those cross sections, but those cross sections aren't real. What you really have is a complete dominance of towers. The valley is not going to be apparent. What you're going to feel like is being in the bottom of a canyon with sort of 40-story towers all around you. There's too many of them. They're too close together. And that's further exacerbated by the continuous L-shaped base wall. That also, to me, is a fundamental flaw of this scheme. I think, as Ralph gently put it, and Jessica implied as well, I think there needs to be a substantial break between R4 and R5. That should not be a continuous, massive podium that kind of just feels like people are trapped. Go back to kind of basic, how do you make a great neighborhood? The length of the blocks matter. Basic Jane Jacobs rule. Don't make me walk down an incredibly long streetscape, all of the same architecture without any kind of break. That should, that lower east-west street should connect visually right through to Islington, allow for pedestrian opening there. I think that's essential. I think the other part of it that's essential and really missing is community support. This is not a complete community. This is predominantly residential with a lot of cars and a minimum amount of retail and, one modest childcare. That is not going to cut it. There needs to be a community center as part of a place like this. I don't know where the community center is as part of the larger community that's evolving. There needs to be other kinds of community support spaces, medical care, all the other kinds of social support spaces that one might imagine. And it raises for me the topic of community capacity. I appreciate our city is under tremendous pressure to add a lot of density, a lot of housing. And if we're not careful, we're going to just create large-scale ghettos where the kind of social infrastructure of the place is completely lacking. The transportation infrastructure of the place is clearly lacking. I think we really need to take seriously the notion of complete communities. And while I think there are many good parts to this project, I think it needs a major haircut on density and some substantial adjustments to the built form. It's got at least 2 towers too many, and I think that base really has to change. And I support the other commentary about more retail, more life at grade. And then I think, maybe there's something here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim Melvin. Jim?
Hello.
Hi.
Okay. Thanks, Meg. Thanks very much for your presentation. I agree with Joe. I think there is a canyon being created here, not the valley. And I think R9, R10, R1 can be cut, would be, as Vanathe said, the mid-rise in this area are really successful. So why all of a sudden are we looking at more towers when I think surrounding the park and open space, the mid-rise would work, and perhaps even R3 and R4 are made into one tower that is further back towards Islington. I want to talk a little bit about the park and open space, and that there is too much density here. We have 7,600 people and 4,286 square meters of park. That's only 0.56 of a meter squared per person. That's way too little. And once you add dogs, daycare, additional programming, there won't even be a place for people to sit. I think we need to rein in the amount of people that are going to inundate a park space. Otherwise, the park won't be sustainable in terms of its use because too many people will be using it. I would suggest that the city, Vanathe mentioned Marion Maloney Park as a really good example of density of park space to development space. I think if that's really a good example, why doesn't the city find out what the ratio of residents and park space is in that area and similar programming? Yes, the city has identified a portion in the secondary plan of what should be park space, but it's still not enough. And to that end, I would suggest that with this plan in front of us, the roadway in front of R3, R4 going north-south can probably be removed and let the traffic drive through the L-shaped building, which seems to be where everyone will want to drive, and have the southern road dead end to the parking, which is actually another street inside the L-shaped building, and the Werner between R9 and C2 could become more of a car street, and put the people and the park spaces together. And with the east-west road at the north, when it comes to connecting the parks, that should probably be a raised pedestrian connection rather than a car traveled road. The cars can still travel through it, but don't put curbs and don't put those things in the way. Make the spaces of the North Park and the Central Park all one. Just seeing if there's other comments here. Oh, there was comments about sun and wind. I believe those studies will be necessary really to make some livable environments in this area. Those are my comments. Thanks very much, Mr.
Thank you. Juhi.
Thank you. I echo previous panel's members' concern on the amount of hardscape, the proposed density for a non-transit oriented development. I do appreciate sort of the approach to the stormwater management and bioswales in terms of sustainability. For the building, there's a good approach to the building envelope and the mechanical system. It's actually really great to see that you are quite close to the tier 2 level of the TEDI requirement at this early stage, which suggests there's even more opportunity to enhance it as you move along your design. I really encourage you to keep on looking tier 2 requirements. I think at minimum for development of this scale, the greenhouse gas intensity target of tier 2 definitely have to be met. Really looking at either a district energy system or building scale solutions, whether it's geothermal or electrification of the heating system as much as possible should be looked at for future resiliency. Aside from the TGS, I do think embodied carbon for this development should be tackled. If you look at the 3D rendering, again, the amount of concrete and steel that will be brought onto this site to build this, the embodied carbon will easily trump any measures that you're putting in place on the operational carbon. And again, there's really good steps that you have put in here, minimizing and removing the underground construction, but it has to be thought about very early on, so it's not adding to the cost later in the stage. In general, again, the massing, I think it's interesting. Like, what happens when you're driving out in the garden or in Etobicoke, and as you're leaving the city, and all this massive density is popping up there? It's actually really easy to see where one developer's development starts and ends, just because you'll see 5 to 6 towers that look exactly the same, very close to each other. And I don't know if that helps our density or the fabric that we're creating. Again, like setting aside whether the density is right or wrong, and I understand that these are just placeholder they're placing right now. I just imagine the 7 towers almost looking exactly the same, very close to each other, and you'll know exactly this massive development was created by one developer. So again, just something to think about as you further develop this site, and whether, again, I sort of support previous panel members about the variation of density or offsetting it, because I almost imagine the way it's laid out right now, almost 7 towers out of the 10, all the occupants are just facing each other's units. And you're not even looking at the park, and you'll have your blinds down all the time for privacy. So just something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks for the presentation. I guess, like Ralph, I appreciate the park at the heart of the project and the image and inspiration of the valley, and I agree with the comments that Ralph made and observations about the erosion of that podium and the if you push that idea, the success that might have. I also appreciate the excess open space that's being given on this project to be able to connect that planned green space on the Queensway back to this project, if I'm understanding it correctly, and there is in fact an oversupply. I also appreciate the architectural expression that's being put forward, even if it is early days. I think, like Michael, there are some nice subtle dialogues that are developing between the towers, and it's reading like a family of buildings, which I appreciate. Like Gordon, I was also frustrated that shadow studies were not included for us to review, because the main placemaking aspect of this project, the heart of the development, how much of this open space is in shadow is definitely something that needs to be reviewed. I was relieved to hear that the city does have some tests and some desires for keeping the Queensway in sun as a kind of street. So maybe there is a chance this might be a bit of a high street in the future. And also there are some targets for the number of hours that this park will have sunshine for. So it'd be great to just see that demonstrated. With respect to the development getting to be a bit less car oriented, I wonder if the site plan could use a bit of a rethink, and you've heard lots of comments here, but 2 simple suggestions that I have. One is that this internal L-shaped road on the north and west side of that podium, I'm just not sure why that can't be moved to the perimeter of the site. You're showing a very, very shallow podium, and pairing that road next to the service road and Gardner on-ramp, and then having all of that ground floor actually face the park, to me seems like a kind of a better idea. And then you would have connectivity with this bulb. So I'm not sure why there's a kind of dead end. So the kind of pairing of cars with cars, and then having much more, increasing that opportunity for retail and liveliness along that whole edge to the park, I think is something that could be considered. And then If you could go to page 7 for me, please. I hope it's in this package. The one of the overall development with the future context showing, especially to the west. It was page 7 of our, yes, this one. Thank you. Exactly. So when I look at the one block that's left between St. Lawrence and Dorchester, was it? I can't remember there, but that,
Yep.
yeah, that area, I just don't really understand why that's being preserved in the kind of future context. Right across to the west of St. Lawrence, you have 18 and 24-story towers, and yet on the site that we're reviewing today, there's actually 2 rows of buildings, the commercial, which is 7 and 8 stories, and then right beside it, 25-story towers. So if this were really a kind of complete community with a truly mixed use target at heart, I think those 2 rows could become 1 row of buildings, residential on top of 7 or 8 stories of a commercial podium. And you could therefore free up a lot more of the site for green space and to be able to sculpt some of the massing and really have a fighting chance of getting sunlight into the park, which is really the main placemaking opportunity for this proposal. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
I think, Heather, you took a lot of the words right out of my mouth. I think going back to the maybe complete communities question and what sort of Jim and Joe said, I think this is an area that's sort of really, it stands out the fact that we don't have a kind of clear secondary plan, and we're all kind of doing our best to make do with a kind of incomplete planning framework, I guess, and sort of SASPs and kind of rapid conversions and a scale of stuff that, any city would be happy to get 8,000 people moving into their downtown, never mind 3 of those projects in just 1/4 of their neighborhood or 1/4 of their city. And it's caught us, I think, collectively a bit flat-footed. I'll echo that, transit improvements here are paramount to making any of this work, never mind this site, but the other 3 that you're showing here. That's both Queensway, but also Islington as a kind of route that could get you to the subway or GO stations. And we don't have time to plan these things. This has to be like one of these rapid TO bus implementations to kind of avert the catastrophe and then get around to the planning and petitioning of the governments to find the capital dollars. I just don't see how any of this works at this scale with a bus every half an hour. We're all deluding ourselves. On a similar front, the nearest school's 1.5 kilometers, 20-minute walk away. Who's going to live here? How are they going to get there? We're only doubling down on people driving and choking these intersections with even more cars and more traffic. So provide the community services that do that. I think, Heather, your point about that sort of employment piece in between all of this is sort of a problem in my mind, and the reaction in this scheme of putting that sort of 2 commercial uses up against Dorchester is a really backwards way of doing it. Those offices want to be close to the transit, close to the intersection, close to the park, animating these spaces, as Ralph and others have talked about. Those office workers are the customers for the retail that could happen but isn't going to happen. It's what gets you the 24/7, or at least whatever it is, 18.5 kind of life cycle and vibrant place. And right now we've shunted them just because we have policies about transition to employment uses that I've looked up and down Dorchester. You've got a dance school, you've got a graphic design branding studio, you've got a fireworks place, which just means it's a placeholder. There's not a key employment land there, and I just don't know why we're stuck on it. So with all that in mind, can we then go back to revisiting the plan? And others have already said it. I think there's too many roads surrounding too many parks. Others have coined the term the moat around these parks. And we're missing kind of the unique aspects of this site. And so I think the expressway, Islington, the mega podium, the back it's unique. And I support the reaction of kind of putting the parking and throwing your back against it. It's a noisy, messy thing with particulate matter that gets in your lungs. It pollutes your children's brains. It stops you from being able to concentrate. Great, put your back to it. But then don't miss the point that you've effectively got a service drive that serves all of those units there. And so if you can use that to your advantage, eliminate the road that sort of separates the park from the main buildings, or shorten it so it runs up to the driveway to Queensway, perhaps, and then have as many connections to the park directly as possible, it'd be great. The other one that stands out for me is the sort of POPs, I think. That's to the west of R1. I'm not sure that the instinct to kind of connect all of these parks is the right move. You're still creating 3 green spaces that are separated by roads and driveways, and they have different characters, different adjacencies. What if you took that green space, put it where R9 is, double down, make a really big green space, make it vibrant, make it central, and then choke that up, and then the thing that's on the Queensway can have a very different character, right? It can be much more urban, it can be its own thing, it's facing the busy street, and instead create a kind of green heart, as you're describing. Others have talked about the amount of hardscape. I say, yeah, double down, make it green, eliminate the roads, wrap it with offices, wrap the bases of those offices with retail, double, triple, quadruple the amount of community facilities. It's not just a daycare. You're going to need all the rec facilities, health clinics, and all of that. Then you're talking about a complete community. Sorry, coming back to my L-shaped podium, don't assume any of that means you don't have that break. I think the break is still possible, and you can have 1 or even 2 breaks, probably towards Islington is my first instinct, that allow the permeability, but still protect you from the worst of that noise. So I think there are opportunities. I did get a chance to find that EA. I think the urbanization of those ramps and the signalized intersection at the bottom there is really going to help this. So lean into that, work with that. But I think with that, you're going to see more and more of these people crossing, poor pedestrians, over the Gardiner along Islington, as Ralph said, and give them a refuge, invite them into the oasis you've created here. So I think I've touched on all of the things. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. So thank you. Again, appreciate the ambition. Let's do this right, but let's not sleepwalk into it. It's a unique site. The density may be fine, but we got to pack it with the supports and the infrastructure that makes it happen. Apologize for that, Chair. I just needed to get that off my chest. I'm done.
No, I mean, thank you very much, everybody, for your comments, and to the proponents and the city for bringing this to this pack to the committee. I mean, I think Paul's final comment there is the way to start the summary at a high level, which is to say, this is, in some ways, you could think of it as a project that's in advance, like that it's coming too soon, that it's anticipating a future that we don't even know whether that's coming. And by that I mean it's not necessarily a scheme that's going to be at this time viable from a transit perspective, which is something that folks have really landed on as a point of consensus. Without higher order transit here, this development isn't viable. One panel member made the suggestion that unless that higher order transit, I mean, one solution to that is to say, yes, as Paul said, we just bring the buses in now until something is something more permanent and more reliable, or higher order transit is made here. But unless that's security, one panel member suggested this should just be a much less dense development. And really, that leads into the second point, which is, I think, at that higher order as well, which is that this is a scheme that will have, somewhere around 7,500 residents in it. And yet we don't know what that landscape of the surrounding context looks like in terms of complete community. And I don't think, it's ahead, again, this is a development that's maybe ahead of its time, which in the sense that it's it's coming too soon without the supports that it will need to have in the neighborhood in order to make this a community that people can thrive in. Looking at the development itself, the programming, even if we're not thinking about the context and what will come around this to support it in terms of community amenity, panel felt quite clearly that there was, or quite strongly that there was insufficient retail, restaurants in the development, insufficient community amenity in the form of community center, medical clinics, and schools, whether those are on site or off. These are critical to the creation of a successful community. Folks also mentioned, some panel members, made the suggestion of, could you look at live work facing the park, look at a different orientation and different location for the employment lands, really give a deep, hard look at rejigging, reconceptualizing the proportion and the programming of spaces and uses within the development. Another point of consensus was the hardscape to softscape ratio, that there's a lot of building here and a lot of building and a lot of hardscape once you take away the tree canopy. The scheme placemaking relies heavily on nature and the success of the inner green space, but it's not well defined or conceptualized yet, and is surrounded by too much road. Two members made the suggestion that the L-shaped road should be moved to the south side of the podium so that you get better connectivity and better, just a more successful inner green space to the development. Another point of consensus is that there's strong concern, valley and shadow, strong concerns about the amount of shadow the scheme will create on the parkland and the canyon-like condition at the base, which is exacerbated by that continuous podium. Another point of consensus was, and in this one I have several sub-points to it, was around the architecture. There were a number of panel members felt that there was successful architectural scaling elements on the interior of the block. There was some disagreement as to whether the kind of mono culture nature of the architecture was a good thing or a bad thing, or was something to be favored or not. So no one didn't land anywhere in particular there. But there was certainly consensus around the idea that the southwest corner needs an aperture. For environmental reasons, wind specifically, pedestrian access, and to connect the south verge of grass, which will otherwise be an abject and possibly unsafe space. There's also one comment around noting that there seemed to be insufficient setback or transition between the shared and more private zones, which is to say the townhomes off of the park. Overall, it's not, this is a project that is, the issues with this project, or the concerns with this project, I should say, go beyond its boundaries. Which is to say, this is a rapidly developing area of Toronto, and like Jessica, I know it well, but I know it as large parking lots that are up against the Gardiner Expressway, sandwiched between major arterial roadways. So it's not, we absolutely acknowledge the challenges here, and that you're designing this in the absence of understanding and knowing what is coming. Now that the Gardiner Expressway has been moved from one level of government to another, and in the absence of substantive proactive transit planning here too. So very challenging, but I think we can sum it up by saying that it's assuming too much about what will come here to support it, and we don't have any evidence or guarantees that that's coming. And that's of great concern to us and for the future residents of this. And so some rethinking on that, or a pause, or whatever it will take in order to better align this development with its environment is, in the opinion of the panel, much needed. Thank you everyone for your comments. Thank you for the presentation. There's no vote on this one because it's a PAC. So the review I'm going to call it, this is the end of the review. We were meant to start the next one at 4:25 with a 15-minute break, but let's instead start it at 4:40. So back in 5 minutes. And sorry for the short break. Thank you all very much.